Thank you very much for joining us today. We're looking forward to chatting with you. We have a full house, and it's absolutely fantastic to have you with us for this afternoon's conversation about women in the boardroom. Much to discuss. We certainly, if I can introduce the panel, and we have myself, I'm head of appointment with Sirdar Group. Farah, if you can say hello. Farah Esmail, head of Kenya.
Everyone.
Hi, and we're just about to have Gisèle Wertheim Aymes join us, who's founder of Woman or World of Longevity, the Longevity magazine, and also online as well. So whilst we wait for Gisèle to join us, what I would like to do, and ahead of running through the introductions, is just to let you know that we're going to be conducting a poll. And because we have you're joining us from many parts of Africa and beyond, we will have a couple of questions, and we'd love you to answer that for us. So that'll be going out shortly to you. And then what we'll do as well is, in terms of the topics, we're going to run through the introductions. We are going to have a Q&A, a question answer session, your thoughts, your comments, towards the end of this afternoon. And so please do not feel that you can't ask anything ahead of time. If we're chatting about something and something comes up, please put it into the chat box or the Q&A box. We want to be able to answer as much as we can. Sometimes we find that the questions you have will actually be answered as part of the conversation. So please do not hesitate to let us know your thoughts, your comments, and any questions that you have. That poll should be going out shortly as well. And I see that we have Gisèle joining us. Hi, Gisèle.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. We're going to kick off now today.
Fantastic.
And that's the poll that's coming up. And I'll just get that off somehow. We have that. Okay, so the topics for today, we're going to introduce ourselves so that you know who we're at, where we're at. We're going to dive into the experience we've had. We're going to voice thoughts around women in the boardroom, women in business, the challenges, the opportunities, etc. The topics for discussion, and we're going to really try and stick to that, is diversity in the boardroom, the current and the ideal, women as catalysts for change in family-run particularly and privately held businesses. We know that there's certainly challenges in listed organizations as well. And much of what we talk about today is going to really fall into the listed category as well. And then we're going to look at how can women improve their prospects of attaining boardroom placements. You know, the questions come up, are you boardroom ready? What is boardroom ready? You know, what are we doing in that space, and how can we help ourselves? And then we're going to have a Q&A. So we look forward to those questions. As I say, please start posing them as they come to you, and we'll close off. So if I may, Gisèle, if I may start with your good self, if you'd like to introduce yourself to everyone.
Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really, I'm looking forward to this session, and it's Women's Month, so it's even more poignant because it's Women's Month. So, and Monday is Women's Day, and I wish everyone ahead of having a wonderful day, a restful, peaceful day in which you just enjoy being a woman. So, just a very quick summary. I have been in business for, gosh, over 3 decades now. And I started, funny enough, working for my father-in-law. At the time, he wasn't my father-in-law. I went straight out of university and I worked for a typical entrepreneur. He had established one of the country's largest vitamin companies. He was very eccentric, very maverick. And that's how I sort of cut my teeth, working for him and learning what it was like to be in an entrepreneurial organization that was growing rapidly. I then went on into corporate. I didn't stay very long with him because I was very career driven, and there wasn't a clear path for me at the time with him. And I also wanted to, you know, I'd had a bit of experience in that family environment, and I wanted to really just get into the formal work environment. So I went into corporate, and I stayed in corporate for over 15, well, actually with FMB, it was close to 18, 19 years. Working my way up at Times Media, in media, launching some amazing magazines like Elle, and decoration, longevity stuff. I did amazing things, worked on the Sunday Times, Sunday World, Sowetan, Business Day, Financial Mail. I've launched the first digital website, newspaper in the country. And then I got headhunted to go to First National Bank, and I became the media director in a new post at First National Bank. It was an extraordinary time. I worked under some really visionary entrepreneurs like Michael Jordan, and we just did amazing, amazing things. Also when the digital, I wouldn't say revolution, but when digital really started happening in this country, when we first went onto Twitter. In fact, we were the first bank on Twitter. I managed to convince the bank to go onto Twitter. So that was an amazing growth experience. And then I faced a very tough decision. While my career was really doing well, and I'd become quite a media personality, my father contacted me. My father, like my father-in-law, had been an entrepreneur, and he was running a medical business. And his health had gotten really bad, and typical of an entrepreneur, he did not have a succession plan. He felt, and he still does feel to this day, that he's going to live forever, and there was no need to have such a thing. But of course, he got a diagnosis, and he got a very, very big fright, and he had no plan. And he just could not contemplate what to do at that time. So somehow, and I say somehow because I always reflect on that decision, it went against every bone in my body, actually, to go back into a family-run environment. I've been on the board of my father-in-law's business on and off during my years, when I was able to balance corporate and being on a board, and that really gave me a big insight into how family businesses run. And I was actually quite reluctant, but because it was such a life-changing situation for our entire family, I decided to do it. And that was 10 years ago, and a lot has changed in my life since then. Eventually, I would not want to describe my time in the family business as the most progressive time of my career. I managed eventually to get a resolution in the family to sell the business because it wasn't working any other way. And sometimes that happens. And it's been very positive since it happened. But, and then I managed to launch my own business in that time too. But that's really how I've cut my teeth. So I've had this kind of a very interesting life where I've kind of dipped and been in very, very formalized environments with lots of controls, excos, board pack reporting, very, very formulated, lots of, not rules, but a lot of governance issues going into then, the entrepreneurial world, totally different family dynamics, lots of emotion, lots of challenges. And I always say I'm still standing. There's a little sign on my forehead and it says, I have more guts than I have sense. And that's the story of me.
The story of my life will be Beverley, you're on mute for 2020. Thank you so much, Gisèle. Appreciate that. Farah, please take a moment and introduce your good self.
Great, thanks so much. And so glad to be on this panel with you, Gisèle and Bev. So Farah Esmail, I'm the head of the Sirdar group in Kenya. I've been a lawyer for about 20 years and started off my career as a litigator and then really moved into in-house roles. And for the last 15 years, I've served in a leadership role in organizations at a senior management level, worked in various industries, but a lot of them have been very male-dominated industries, so have been in manufacturing and the security sector. Of all my experiences, I've probably spent about 10 years in corporate governance, establishing best practices and processes, and just generally within organizations. I've worked with companies of different sizes, so I've worked startups, I've worked with multinationals, I've worked within family businesses. So I've really had an experience across different industries and cultures and businesses. And also in my professional life and my personal life has sat on a number of boards, a lot of nonprofit boards. And I also, in my spare time, I'm a bodybuilder and I compete internationally. So that's kind of myself in a nutshell. And I guess I would probably be coming at it more from the woman in the boardrooms and in senior leadership roles and what I can offer to the panel today.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Myself, I head up a point for the Sirdar group. Prior to that, I had a very comfortable lifestyle business, as so many of us have had, in terms of being an executive search and really driving that. And it was, what can I give back and what can I do? As I'm passionate about women in business, women in board levels, and really board governance. and corporate governance. So I've probably been in business for over 25, 30 years, growing a lot of focus around strategy and working with organizations as to how really be sustainable. And one of my areas is that I have experience in independent chairing as a trustee, working with MPOs, and being with part of the BWA, I found that very useful, Business Women's Association. I was instrumental there in drawing up a program called Fast Track for empowering the youth, both women and young men. So today really is about talking about women in the boardroom, women in business, and not forgetting that there is a balance out there that needs to be attained as well. To start really, we'd like to look at diversity, to sort of set the scene, diversity in the boardroom. And the recent survey done by Sirdar Group, it's Africa's non-executive and independent director fees, performance and diversity survey for privately held and family business. The latest one is 2019. In fact, after today's webinar, we're going to be asking you to look at the 2020. We're going to send that through to you if you don't mind, because it's so important to be part of the reports and the information that we attain within Africa. So really, when we look at diversity, we know that within King 4 and King 4's report on corporate governance, there's around recommended practices. We should really be including and promoting diversity in the board and board membership, and that is age, culture, race, gender, and fields of expertise. But we should also be setting targets for gender representation in its composition. We found a couple of interesting things, and we're going to expand on this. First of all, of the companies assessed, 30.5% had no female board members in 2019. And interestingly enough, females were earning slightly more, 6% more in fact, than their male counterparts when it came to non-executive and independent director fees, which is probably the first time I've seen that. And the question we need to look at is that because of the scarcity? Is it because of the organizations that were represented in the survey? It'll be an interesting one to look at. But we know that this is not a Africa-only issue. We understand that it's a worldwide situation. In fact, only 17% of board seats are covered by women, if we look at the global picture. And yet we know from this survey that businesses that had 2 or more female board members reported a higher instance of performance in terms of the board's impact on the company. And that boards with female members were considered generally far more effective and had 5 to 10% increase in EBITDA over the previous year. So this is really key if we look at it. And we also understand that if you're looking to bring investors on board or looking to sell, a diverse board creates a huge difference. So we need to look at this and sort of look at, before we even look at the catalyst for change, what is it around diversity? Any comments around that, Farah or Gisèle?
Barbara, I think it's very critical. Obviously, coming out of corporate and actually living through the democratization process in South Africa and the introduction of BBBE codes, in formal environments, it's institutionalized. You know, and I think what happens in family-run businesses, it's a lot looser and it's more difficult, you know, to get that kind of focus on the issue. And it also depends on which industry. And some industries are much more under pressure to ensure diversity, and other industries aren't. So what's I believe really critical is that the role that we must play, every single one of us in society, is to absolutely encourage diversity and representation in any business. It's really, you know, it's a cornerstone of future sustainability. So, you know, to me, where some families could be quite closed, and some people talk about how family businesses can be quite closed, this is really, I think, the challenge of family businesses, to open and to allow that in, because there's such amazing potential that will be unlocked in that process to really ensure sustainability going forward, especially in markets that are growing, and the markets are growing and changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is something, yeah?
So I think I'd want to comment on it more coming from, it's basically a question of equality. This is half of the population. So, you know, while the studies are showing that this has got to do with performance, I think we also have to come at it from a place of equality. So for a lot of decision making, especially in the retail industry, you know, where probably 70% of the decisions are being made by women, it's really important to have women on boards for performance. Also in industries where there's a large number of employees, I think you find that having more women on the board to make some of those decisions. Coming at it from a board performance perspective, because that's what we do at Sirdar, it's about our environment and our world getting a lot more complicated than it used to be. And so we need perspectives in the boardroom that are going to actually respond to the complex global environment. That's really where it comes from, and why you need the perspectives and why the diversity is important. So you know, it's got to do with equality. It's got to do with bringing people on the table that have different perspectives. And I wanted to actually read from an article from the Harvard Law School that talks about it, that says, a board composed of directors representing a range of perspectives leads to an environment of collaborative tension that is in essence of good governance. So basically, in a room where everyone has different points of view and there's a greater opportunity for cross-pollination of ideas, there are fewer unspoken assumptions, less groupthink, and a greater likelihood of innovation. This allows the board to ask probing questions, tackle the challenging issues such as risk management and succession planning, which are at the center of good corporate governance. So, you know, coming at it from good corporate governance, that is really why diversity is so important.
Absolutely. And we need to look at that. We understand within the marketplace as well that, you know, the reports have shown in the past that there are many women and young women entering the market, but there are less women at the top in terms of executive roles and the management roles and moving into board. And that's because many women will exit from career, come back into career as well. And there seems to be a natural flow. So it's about really harnessing the experience and expertise that is at this level, and best utilizing it wherever we can. And we're going to be looking at how you as a woman can actually look to build that as well, and build yourself further down the road in this chat today. One of the things that we want to cover is how can one be a catalyst, and especially in family-run and privately held organizations. I remember when I first moved to the UK, I really had to fight for my place in a very male-dominated environment. It was prior Y2K. You were either on a trading floor in London, or you were out in the recruitment space in IT. And I remember having 7 interviews to actually pass the mark and to get a nod in to the floor. So you know, we've got to keep driving. We've got to keep changing. And I can certainly say that I saw a huge change in that particular industry that I was in as well, where it went from a pint and a pie to a lot more of the service orientation. So there is going to be change. There is going to be, how do we look to do things? And if I can start off with your experience, Gisèle, possibly in that space.
So I think the most important thing for me, and again, lending my experience over the years, has been that you have to keep learning. You cannot be a catalyst for change unless you are continually learning yourself. And that means that you don't rest on your laurels. You may have graduated and done very well at one point in your life, and then you get into either business or corporate environment and you move along. It's really important that there's a continuing education. And again, when I look at my experiences from family to corporate, it was always easy in the corporate environment to get into those learning situations. Number one, there's a bit more space for it. It's more encouraged. When you're in family businesses, and entrepreneurial businesses, they tend to be very pressurized, fewer, less capacity to indulge, maybe the word indulge, but to have that freedom to be able to go and study. But it's really important, whether it's just short courses, going to do a directorship course, or actually looking at your sector and looking at what's happening in your sector and then adding courses to that. This is one of, I think, again, one thing women don't do enough of. A lot of men understand the value of getting an MBA or doing further education, but a lot of women, because we're balancing, and this is also the reality that we will be talking about today, we are often balancing, certainly if not a partnership, we're balancing children and other responsibilities. Women don't stop just with their children or their husbands. Often they have to look after elderly parents or sisters or someone. It's the nature of women. And I think particularly in less advantaged communities, it's much deeper. So when we look at that, we have to have this personal plan. And part of that personal plan is, how do I continue to add value to the business I'm in? And particularly in a family business, we need to focus on that. So that really would be the insight from my side, that you focus on that and you never let up on that, no matter how senior you get or how powerful you get in any environment, that you have that learning culture.
What was your biggest challenge that you found within working within a family-run or privately held organization?
I believe the emotional issues are the single biggest challenge. It's getting family members to separate business is business to the notional emotional relationships that have been formed over many, many years. So I came into my own family's business, well after I'd had a long corporate career, but my siblings had been in there since they left university. My father had, created the business after he left corporate and had been in it for many years. So I come from a corporate environment with rules, with boundaries, very clear boundaries around how we engage with dissent, for example. So you spoke about, we spoke earlier on about the need to have this ability to speak out, to have, we need to be able to push boundaries with each other. I think when it gets into family businesses, it gets taken very personally, because we default almost to our position in the family tree, in the family organism, and there is, every family has this dynamic, whether you were the eldest, the youngest, how you grew up with your siblings, how your parents saw you. And we are conditioned that way, no matter how conscious you are of it. So trying to bring in some sort of boundaries and rules was really my single biggest challenge, because I've lived in that environment where obviously corporates have lots of politics, without a doubt, but they're much more regulated. And when there is dissent, there is a way to deal with it. There's a way to deal with it that's more formalized. Whereas in family businesses, it can. And again, it also depends where you are in the pecking order. So if you've got a patriarch or a matriarch who's still very much in control of the business, then you start to almost feel like you're a child again in a squabble situation when you were a little kid. And now you've got to go to mom or dad to sort it out. And that to me, and I think many books have been written, on the subject of how, if you, for example, are a parent running an organization and you want some succession planning, even how you deal with that dynamic and how you create boundaries. So to me, it was always trying to remove myself from that position and to be seen as not a sibling or a daughter, but to be seen as a manager. That I had a manager and I had a job to do. And there were no handouts or no leg ups just because I happened to be family. Absolutely not. But at the same time, it's quid pro quo. Then you've got to treat me. The other way around is you've got to treat me as you would treat a formal employee. There's a dispute that gets handled in a formal way, in a way that is professional. And I think that to me was the hardest thing of all.
Thank you. Absolutely. And Farah, I mean, you've worked in industries that, are male dominated. What are the experiences that you've had to deal with through this?
I think with any organization, it is based on meritocracy, as Gisèle says, and you've got to keep developing yourself and bringing to the table abilities to add value. So that is the first thing. You got to be prepared, and you got to be constantly adding value. It's about creative solutions as well, bringing a solution to the table that may not be something that might have been considered. I found myself, especially in the security sector, working closely, for instance, with the leadership there. Probably, and also because it was an HR leader, an HR legal role, really bringing in the EO aspect, which I think women naturally bring to the table, looking at that emotional quotient, which is really important when running a business, and bringing value on that side and understanding how to make decisions and the ramifications of decisions. It has been, it's not easy when you sit across, you're in a labor negotiation with the union and you're the only woman there, or you sit in the business meeting and you are the only, you do feel a bit isolated. But I think part of it is also finding, and we'll probably talk more about this, is a champion, somebody who will further and support your comments or your viewpoints at that table. But also what I found is I actually don't think about it. So for me, I don't sit at the table and go, I'm different, I'm a woman. I have earned the credit to be at the table, and so I don't view it differently. So I bring that approach. I do find some women who will kind of step back and think, I'm a woman, I'm marginalized, and not speak up. And I think part of it is you've earned the right to the table, and so not to see yourself different. I mean, you can't completely ignore that these issues are apparent, and you kind of ignore the fact that you're the only woman at the table, but you deliver as per your mandate.
Absolutely. Everyone is there for a reason, and everyone has a part to play with it within the conversation. And it is important to remember that. I think, we are certainly lending ourselves more and more to really addressing one of the key things. And for many of us, it's about how can we as women improve our prospects of attaining board placements. And we've touched on some of this. I just wanted to share something before we dive into some real conversation around here. And this is about balancing the board. There's a combination of skills, experience that we should look for. And it starts with values. It starts with your core skills and then bringing forward your specialist skills. From there, for a board, it's about diversity, it's about perspective, and about the personal profile. So we talk of board culture, we talk of, what is needed within the board environment. And very often, certainly within Sirdar, we say it's not about the industry experience that you need, because often the specialists are sitting in that boardroom space already. It's about what else do you bring? And this is where we need to look at what do we as women bring to the table. And that's having the confidence and the ability to state what we have as well. So there are, a whole number of areas here, and I really want to dive into this, whether it's about the networking aspect, bearing in mind that under 10% of non-executive director roles are actually advertised, by organizations, whether it's Sirdar, IOD, Boardroom Africa, executive search organizations. So what does that tell you? It tells you that you need to have a name. You need to be thinking about it. You need to be building it as part of your plan, your overall plan, and ensuring that you are networking and engaging. And I have found, having dealt with so many incredible men and women over the years in terms of non-executive directors, independent chairs, and CEOs, that there's definitely a willingness and an openness to refer, to assist, to mentor. And this is something we need to be looking at today. So maybe we can really sort of look at this now. And I think, something we do, and we haven't spoken about yet, Farah and Gisèle, is culture. How does culture impact our drive and our stance and our belief that we should be in the boardroom?
Oh, yes, very, very, very important question, that one, Barbara, because a lot of women, if you look at, the environment we've come from, it's not been equal, certainly not equal opportunity. And again, it has varied from country to country. So I'm obviously from South Africa. My experience is a privileged experience because I'm white and I'm South African, so I cannot speak I believe that for other women, African women of my age, who are raised in very, very different situations. But what I can say about it is that I think it was unequal. It's just the varying degrees of inequality that happens in a particular society and culture. So without a doubt, we deal with many layers of that. So today, through our laws and BE, we're seeing some normalization, but there's a whole legacy issue. So and that has not been sorted out. That's going to still take a long while. So when we look at that, that's our society around us. So we've got that whole picture of how we socialize as women. So how we are raised by either mothers that were present or absent, how were we raised by our fathers? So were we raised in a matriarchal system? It's absolutely going to have such a strong bearing on how we see ourselves in the world and whether we stand up for ourselves. And I just love how Farah feels so confident and strong about the fact that she has earned that right and she's leaning in, as Sheryl Sandberg, that book, and it's about leaning in, into this role that we take. But so I think that there's a lot of work still to be done, and there's still a lot of inequality that's just built in because of legacy issues, access to education, access to better opportunities, and being educated and being aware of these issues. So what women have to do, and men today, the real challenge is to recognize that, to own that, and to look at what role you can play in helping others to be able to realize their full potential. And again, it's about harnessing talent. It's about really wanting to have, if you have a business, you have to want to have a sustainable business that can go through 3-4 generations. I mean, would be the most incredible goal to have. But then you have to work at it. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, I think I would probably, Gisèle, replicate a lot of your comments. So for a lot of the women we speak to here in this region, coming from, the Indian family businesses or the Kenyan local family business, for instance, culture is huge. So, it's a culture of not speaking up, actually. Women are meant to be seen, not heard. And really breaking out of that is a huge thing. And even with family businesses, a lot of very successful family businesses, women cannot actually be on the board. It's just a few of them that have started having women on their boards in the last couple of years. And we're talking about businesses that have been running for like many, many years. So I think some of it is changing that and helping women to have that voice. To make sure that, again, meritocracy. So just, the quota system doesn't always work, because what happens is you end up just appointing a woman, and then if she comes from this background where she doesn't get to say much or doesn't have a champion in the boardroom, it's going to be an effective board member. And then it just goes into this whole thing of, yes, we have women on the board, but they're not effective. So I think it's about having women to be even more prepared, having someone, a champion, having mentors, and getting everything they need to be the most effective board member. I think that's what's important. And so we need to know that there are these cultural norms in these places. And I think the average age, I think there were statistics of the board of directors used to be like 55.8, right? And so it's also an issue for younger women, because how do you come to the table as a younger female wanting to be on the board when the perspective of a board member is a very traditional view of who should be a board director? So I think the cultural factors are important, and knowing that they're there. And as we advise families, it's about also looking at getting female representation to the board and breaking those traditional cultural barriers for the women in the business. And then same with businesses, it's important. And then we go back to the argument of equality. We go back to the argument of performance in trying to do so.
Absolutely. And one of the things we need to talk about, because this is a very important part of it, in terms of really understanding where one comes from. But when we take that view of, all right, how do we ready ourselves for a board? What do we need to do in order to be available, to show that we're available, to have that structure and that process? these are the questions we need to ask. What is board ready? And so many people sort of are interested in opportunities, but it's that taking that first step. How do I get my first board appointment? And so these are the things that we need to look at as well, is what have you done to empower yourself? What directorship training have you undertaken? What mentoring have you taken on? I certainly remember I have a great mentor in the very first board position I ever had. In terms of corporate governance, the chairman was fantastic and is fantastic. And so that gave me a very sound grounding as to the way forward. And often, I've also come across, and I'm sure you ladies have as well, is, meeting people that are on a board but they're not sure what it takes to be a director and what a board is actually there for. Now, this is about making sure that you are ready for that before it's too late, because there's accountability in being a director and being on a board. So what would you say, maybe Farah, if we can start with yourself, from being board ready, what do you think the top 3 things are that one should do in order to prepare oneself?
So being board ready first is taking account of your what you can actually offer to add value to a board. So you're going to be marketing yourself in a different role. Being a director is very different from being a manager. And what are the skill sets you have to offer, and why would you want to be a board director? So the first question is, why do you want to do it? It's not something that everyone wants to do, but really take account of why you want to do it and where you think you can add value. 2, you need to really know that, can you be a director? Do you have the skill set? Because you don't want to be getting into that environment and then sinking, and again, especially as a female, being added to a board and then not be effective. So are you prepared with the skill set for it? And then 3, I think it's really work on, well, what kind of boards do you want to sit on, and how do you get to them, and where do you start making those relationships, and also tailoring yourself to those boards. So looking at your CV and a specific CV for a board director role, and who do you want to start mentoring and connecting with and networking with to get there, is what I would say.
Thank you for that. Gisèle, your thoughts?
So in the context of family business, I think the most important thing is that it's got to be done on merit. And, you can have the goal to be on the family board, but I believe that there's also got to be a buy-in from the other directors on the board and the staff, the management team. Because often you will find in family businesses where the conflict arises will either be other family members who feel aggrieved that you are on that board, or you shouldn't be on that board because maybe you don't have the right qualifications. Or it could be senior management who feel that they've been overlooked and that you're only on that board because you happen to be, the son or the daughter of the founder. So I think that really, Farah's covered all the other points, but I think when we start to look at the family environment, and it starts by having this career plan that is formalized by the family, by the founder or the CEO who runs the business, that sets out goalposts of what would be required for you to sit on the board, so that it isn't something just to, create a diversity. It has to be, it has to have been planned out, and then it has to be communicated, and it's done on the basis that it's warranted, absolutely. The other thing that I thought would be an interesting observation that I've seen is when we look at the boards, and when we look even in family businesses where there is because you get very, very large family businesses that are even bigger than some corporates, is the role of human resources. And the human resource manager or director is very critical in this whole situation, because they set out how this can all be connected and also move through the organization, how it's communicated. And I think this is, again, communication, very important that there's transparency, and that families are committed to this balance and the commitment both to family members as they are to their own senior executives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, something that we really mustn't forget is how we are presenting ourselves to the world. You know, we have a plan, we have this action, we know where we want to be, we want to give back, we want to deliver, we want to share the experience that we've gained and the learnings and the good, the bad, and the ugly at board level. But what are we doing about letting others know? So, you know, it's checking on your LinkedIn profile. Does my LinkedIn profile talk to what it should? You know, am I connecting with the right people out there? Am I having a voice? Am I speaking? You know, am I writing articles? Am I starting the process in terms of looking at boards where, you know, you're sitting on an MPO, on a you know, look at ways and means, because this is about developing yourself and growing your confidence. And really, I think one of the key things is understanding what makes a director. And knowing that even as a founder and looking at non-executive director opportunities, it's still remembering there's a difference between wearing a shareholder hat, a director hat, and a managerial hat. So these are all really, really key. And I think we're getting to a point where I think it would be good to answer some questions. I know we have quite a few coming up as well. Was there anything else, Farah and Gisèle, that you wanted to make mention at this point around how do we create that impact before we head to questions?
I think the only thing I wanted to add to this discussion was when we're talking about being a board director, we're talking about paid roles as a board director where you're adding to a corporation. But one of the things that you can start doing is getting your feet wet and getting onto non-paid volunteer boards where you can start practicing being a board member, or you look for a simulated course where you can, you know, practice being a board member without causing any damage to a place. So these are things where you need to start. It's like, and Sirdar uses the methodology, the analogy of climbing a mountain. So, you know, when you climb a mountain, you know, you can't do it reading a book. You're actually going to climb the mountain. So in the same way, you can't learn how to be a director from reading a book. You've actually got to do it, be in the room, be with a team, and in that collaborative decision-making process, come up with decisions with a bunch of different people. I mean, that's a process that you have to learn how to do. So I think start practicing is what else I would also say you should start doing if you're interested in this.
Absolutely. All right, lovely. Let's have a look. You know, we welcome, as I say, questions. I see we do have quite a few here. I'm just going to look at, let's start it. Right, so thank you very much. Shungai mentioned that she finds it quite discouraging sometimes that other women pull other women down. An assertive woman is perceived as aggressive by other women, and one begins to doubt themselves and their assertiveness. We are forced to hold back in order to be accepted as normal. Ladies, your comment.
Absolutely. I think it's always been one of the saddest parts of my career is that I had more support from men than I ever had from any woman. I would like to believe that it's starting to change, but across the board, in corporate and even in the family business, it's an extraordinary thing. And I suspect that it has to do with the fact that women, because there has been all this inequality, and it's not easy to get ahead, that a lot of women would believe that the way to get ahead is by bringing another woman down. And I had to learn really a lot of coping skills around that. And you use the word networking, use the word trying to encourage, really developing a skin, and really making sure that, you know, at all times you're professional and that you are working the system in a professional and methodical way, and not in an emotional way, which was quite difficult because women by nature, you know, that's one of the great values of having women in businesses. They are able to be empathetic. They are great listeners. They look to solve problems without too much conflict. They are not afraid too much of conflict, but it's always this balance. So I agree, that's discouraging. And the way really to deal with it is to try and get this engagement, the communication, and by having more women, I believe, who share the same values in senior positions, so that they won't tolerate other women who are doing that to other women. And I think that this is the way to change it. It doesn't get changed. And also to encourage men, because sometimes men play off it. You know, it's very difficult for us all to shed our socialized statuses, you know, in society when we get into boardrooms. We bring with us ourselves. So it takes a lot to really look at things. And again, I think this is always putting it on the table, talking openly about it, and separating the wheat from the chaff. That is really how I've dealt with it. There isn't an easy solution to this. It really starts with us women, sadly, or maybe that's a good part, because we can change it if we want.
Absolutely, and that was also in a slightly different format. It was a question and a comment from Lydia, and she spoke of the generational attitude as well, because there is a generational gap in terms of understanding. She's a millennial on the cusp of Generation X, and she felt that older women who were managers and in director positions couldn't relate to her way of thinking in terms of being more out the box, more compliant and non-compliant, and being led almost by a corporate culture dictated by men, having grown up in that space almost. So yes, I mean, that's definitely an interesting comment. And how do we accommodate different generational ideals and values?
Yeah, I think I would add to that, it's a communication piece, and men and women communicate differently, and I guess the generations do as well. And I learned that very quickly. My first demand letter out of law school was described as flowery, and I stopped writing flowery letters after that. And I think, at least in my experience, I find myself to be quite long-winded if I'm trying to explain that. And I've been told that that is generally how women communicate. It's all the details. And I think when I'm sitting at the table with a lot of men, it's like, get to the point, just give me. And so there is a difference. You've got to learn how to communicate. And that does help if you understand who your audience is and what's going on there. So I've had to adapt in that way and take out the flowers, I guess, is what I'd say.
Women do tend to ask the hard questions. That has come up in past reports and surveys. It's quite interesting. Gisèle, you wanted to say something there?
One of the biggest challenges, and it relates to this question, you know, the generational thing is interesting to me, because I suffered from it when I was in my father-in-law's business, and I was very young and very, you know, opinionated when you're young. You know, typically I look at millennials today and I remember myself, probably even worse, and also in a very established environment. And that was interesting for me. And then being a little bit older and going back into the family business after, again, being in very corporate environments where, you know, discussions are much more structured. But, you know, I was encouraged. I was in very innovative environments that really encouraged people who were breaking the box, which was fantastic. And then going into a patriarchal, very patriarchal type of environment where respect, you know, my father, you know, would see us really how we spoke to him or challenged him. He saw it as a respect issue, not whether, you know, it was about great ideas. And that was very interesting. But I will say to you that the way that eventually I learned is really to work on the facts and not, again, the emotion, to keep going back to, if there are these ideas, if there is this direction we need to go in, is to keep working on the facts so that you can get the shift away from, oh, this is some uppity decision maker, you know, person who's wanting to upend all our stuff. The way to do it is, you know, is to provide the information that substantiates it rather than just the ideas. And sometimes that's a lot of hard work, and we are going to get it without a doubt. It's especially, I think, in family businesses. So when you are in a family business, you have to accept that there are going to be these variables that are out of the box as well, and you may have to make a bigger effort with them. And the last thing I wanted to just add to this point is, when you enter the family business, your entry in and your life plan with them includes your income earning plan. Okay. And often when women don't stand up for themselves from the beginning and make sure that they are paid fairly for their worth, even, you know, and not also, because the opposite can happen. You're a family member and then you're not paid market related salary because you're a family member. I've seen that happen a lot. Or, oh, you married and your husband's got a great job, so therefore the family can be subsidized. No, I think there are a lot of these issues that go on that people don't want to talk about. Again, it starts with you setting those boundaries in place. how you behave is really how you're going to define your way. And these are difficult things because we want to be part of it. But at the same time, if we don't set that up strongly, we will bear the consequence down the line.
Absolutely. And I think this leads on to Juliet had a question or a request for us to expound on the importance of emotional intelligence, especially for women sitting on boards. Very key.
So expanding to those would be, so it's just, that is really important now in today's world, to have that empathy, understand the emotional side of a decision. So when you're in the boardroom making decisions, and business is about making decisions, it's then understanding the impact of those decisions and leaving out the impact and not taking that emotional aspect of the empathy or taking into consideration the stakeholders. Where if you have a more comprehensive board that's inclusive of perspectives, it will take into account those. So that's really, I think, having those abilities and in the boardroom. And I wouldn't say men don't have EQ. There's a lot of men that have EQ. But it's also bringing the female perspective into that.
So Barbara, one of the ways that when we saw things were getting very emotional, funny enough, in both family businesses, what we did is we sought outside moderation. Then we would, because often you have the business decision making that has to happen, and then that business decision making may have an impact on the family. Especially, family-owned businesses, family-owned, family invested. I'm not talking ones that are, there are different layers of this, whether they're listed or they're unlisted, but the reality is what sits behind it is family. So in those situations, when we get into maybe conflictual situations that are getting highly emotional and we're not managing to resolve it, it was always good to find an independent outsider, even outside of the board members, who would come in and just start to moderate, because it brings that outside influence in. And I don't think anyone should ever shy away from it. It can be so constructive and so important, just to allow people that space, again, to breathe and to be able to go, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve, and that's your agenda, and this one's that agenda, but there's some moderation happening. And I think family businesses must never be afraid of that either, of allowing that in. Because it allows that growth to get to the next level and that sustainability.
Yeah, and I think on that point, Gisèle, I see a lot of resistance from family businesses because they, especially some of the business here, because there's a lot of confidentiality and we don't want that to go in, and a lot of transparency. So it is overcoming that. And that is something we work to try and explain to the family businesses, that there is some benefit to have someone from the outside help the business and help the board with their issues.
Absolutely, key. There was an interesting comment that I saw earlier from Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. His question is, what can we learn from Rwanda, which is ranked in top 10 at number 9 out of 153 countries globally for gender equality, a tiny nation that has to show us the way forward. Why not use Rwanda as a case study for other African countries to emulate? Now, I would say there that in countries like Canada, etc., they have put directives into place, and there is still the challenge. So it would be interesting to look at the difference that has happened in Rwanda.
Yeah, I think Rwanda is being held up as definitely a country in the region that's really doing well on many, many different aspects. So I think in the US, the SEC has said that they want 40% women on boards by 2025 on the Fortune 100 companies. So there are targets and quotas that I think boards are working to. I think the number that most are looking at is having at least 30% of your women on the board to have an effective board. So I don't know all the details of Rwanda on the women's board representation side, but I do know that they're doing a lot of things right.
Very much so. And let's have a look. There was a question from Kosi, thank you. How do we see things unfolding after the pandemic, COVID-19, regarding appointments to boards based on the survey resets? Will there be any changes?
Interesting. So we at Sirdar have done a lot of webinars and interesting things around strategy and the role of the board post-COVID, and we do see the role of the board changing. And while traditionally the model has been the board sits above the trees and does not go into the weeds of operations, during COVID, we did see the boards being more involved, having even weekly meetings. And, you know, if we go back to the quote about corporate governance that I went to, it's about having a good perspectives on the board that are representative of what's going on in the environment and can deal with all of these risks in the environment. So having those different perspectives on the board will only make you stronger and to deal with future crises. So I think the boards that we're sinking in this time, I would hope that they would be looking to restructure, look at ways to solidify the core, because the board is the heart of the organization, really. I mean, that is where your strategy is, and that is where everything starts from in the perfect board governance world, right? That's what we're trying to attain. Coming from a model of your board adds value and gives you a competitive advantage. So if you are to come from that value adding structure for a board, then I would see that post-COVID we would have more women on board to give you that perspective. For instance, you know, the companies, if women are the ones who are doing all the online shopping and we've moved all online, if you don't have women on the board that are actually giving you those perspectives to your strategy, you're at a big loss. So these are some of the things that I would hope the companies would look at post-COVID.
Absolutely, and it's become even more critical in many cases for a board, and even more so to have an effective board, because we have to look up and to the future as well. So agreed 100% there. And Tapaseng, you mentioned that in your experience, you've picked up that most South African companies are looking for people with experience in board processes, and that there is a limited opportunity for newcomers to pierce that veil, and very often it's the same people on various boards. So, you know, your feeling is that it's getting worse for women without boardroom experience. Any comment there, ladies?
I think it's a very valid concern. If you think about it, Bari, in organizations, there's a lot of focus on skills development training internally and, you know, management. But I don't think at any point, even though I was very ambitious and career oriented, there was ever a discussion about what it would take for me to get onto a board. I was on many excos. You know, obviously I do have to probably couch that my career started pinnacling just as all the changes came into South Africa. So from a PD, I wasn't considered a previously disadvantaged person. So I did hit a bit of a glass ceiling there. But I will be honest with you, even though that was apparent, up until that point, I'd sat on many excos and I was kind of groomed, but there was never that discussion of saying that is what is required. And in order for us to open up and to have this, whether it's small, medium, or large businesses, again, I think it's the responsibility of boards to be able to look at what structures in the organizations are really grooming and identifying board members, and if not internally, then externally, so that you can get new blood, new thinking, and that we're not just, you know, rotating the same amount of people with a skill set. So I think that's one thing. Then I think organizations such as yourselves, I mean, how would you know where, you mentioned earlier on that a lot of the positions aren't even advertised. So if you wanted to find a board position, how would you do that? So, you know, I think that, again, these are, you know, where would you get that? I suppose you would go to one of the, you know, the associations where you can do courses and find out that way. But how does that become more apparent? So when you study or when you do when you are working and doing general management, how you expose that? How do we develop that awareness?
Absolutely. I am aware of the time, and we have got so many more questions. So what we can do is finish off in terms of the actual presentation and carry on for those that would like to to listen in and hear more about the answers to questions and really dive a little bit deeper, if we may. So I'm just going to share this at the moment and finish off in terms of where I would like to thank, Gisèle, and also on behalf of Sirdar. And I just wanted to note, there is actually, we were speaking earlier about applied learning, and someone actually asked that on the questions as well, as where do you go, and what sort of organizations are going to offer director training. Is please do look out there. For example, Sirdar is the Applied Directorship Program starting on the 13th of August. And that really gives you this gamification, so you get a good understanding about not just the sort of learnings, but you're actually getting to dive deeper into what it takes to be a director. And I did make mention earlier around the Sirdar 2020 survey. We would really appreciate your input on this, and we'll be forwarding you a link to the 2020 survey. We would appreciate your support in building this as a reference point, and please do share with you. And I'm going to end on that note, but we will come back to questions for those of you that would like to stay with us. We have many to get through, and if everyone's happy, we can carry on for a little bit longer. So we will do that. So thank you very much, first of all, for those that do have to go. Farah and Gisèle, I want to say thank you for your input now. It's been invaluable and useful, and hopefully we will be able to encourage and inspire and motivate many women at all levels, whether you are growing into the space or whether you are in the executive space and really want to take the next steps now. So we wish you every success. For those that would like to stay with us, sorry.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to leave you now, but thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Gisèle. It was great being on the panel with you.
Bye, Gisèle. Lovely, lovely, lovely seeing you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So for those that wish to stay with us, we do have a number of questions that we wanted to run on with. Kevin, you also had a view about, or asked our view about, installing sort of 50-50 quotas, so men and women on board, starting with listed companies. I think we have briefly touched on already around that there are targets there. There are directives in many countries, and it's about how do we reach those. Rwanda would be a great starting point to see how and where they sit. But I think it is about, it's not easily attained. I think we have issues around industry. We have the how many women have the relevant experience, because when we're looking at boards and we're looking to people on boards, there are a number of requirements that we've touched on, from the skills, the experience, the expertise, the profiles that come on board. And, that may be lacking as well in some areas. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be bringing women into that space and developing them. But sometimes what we'll find is where you've got an established, mature board, it may be easier to bring someone on that doesn't have the relevant boardroom experience as to a board that is newly established and really needs the support and the understanding of corporate governance to help them on their way. So there are variables.
On that, Bev, I'd probably add one of the things we didn't note are just the male ambassadors or the male champions that you need, and identifying roles, for instance, in committees to start mentoring women to come through. So the more support there is to, or if there's a view that we want to advance women in the boardrooms, it's to start, I guess, mentoring them, building their skill sets, and getting these appointments. It doesn't have to be right at the board level, but committees are a great place to start learning as well. And so looking out or seeing a role and promoting a female into that role would be great. And then we see a lot of that happening now, and that's how a lot of the women are coming through as well.
Absolutely. And I see Lydia mentioned that she feels in one of the ways for women to win a boardroom seat is to start their own business. So especially if you have a family too. The corporate world is demanding, and as we have spoken of earlier, there are fall-offs. We have many, many women entering the business environment, graduated more than men actually. I've seen various reports around that, and not making it to the executive stage and moving into board space. So it is demanding. Having a family-owned business is also demanding in its own space, but it is about addressing it as one can, and really building the support around you in order to do so. So there is burnout, and I think we've experienced something very much in this pandemic phase, where we've seen management burnout, we've seen executive burnout, and it's being able to recoup, adjust, and move forward as well. And balancing, there's not so much balance in terms of work and life, but about that flow between work and personal life. Premi asked, how do you deal with dissent in the boardroom without being marginalized? Want to take that up, Farah?
So again, it is about, having, like with anything, there is the relationship building and the rapport. And there is going to be dissent, and there are going to be disagreements, and it's about how do you get over them. And yes, sometimes you will find people in your camp, like in any decision making, and sometimes there won't be. So I guess it's like dissent in anywhere, really. It's like working through that in the boardroom. I don't know if that quite answers the question, but the whole point is to have different opinions in the boardroom so that different perspectives come forward, and then taking into consideration the different viewpoints, a decision is made, and you're able to move towards that decision through the dissent. And it's not easy, and having a good chair makes a big difference to get through the dissent and to make sure that all different opinions are actually heard.
Absolutely. And that, that is often a very healthy board when there is room to ask the hard questions, there is room to have the hard discussions, and be able to move forward from that in a productive and proactive manner.
Yeah, actually, if the board just went through and there was no dissent, I would be very concerned. And that's just a checklist board that are going through the actions of being a board. They're not really doing what their job is.
Absolutely. And there's often a danger, depending on how the board has been formalized to start with, that you have a yes man board. And that is not healthy. Not when we look at what a director needs to focus on, and certainly a non-executive director, which is the sustainability and the success of the business. So Gloria, thank you. You're enjoying the discussion all the way from Ghana. Insightful and enlightening. Thank you very much for that. Catherine, you mentioned mentorship is key for newcomers to the boardroom, and a mentor should be assigned to any new appointee as part of the induction process. Absolutely. It would be lovely if more organizations do bring in a more formalized form of mentorship to really assist and guide any new appointees in that space.
Yeah, I'd add to that a good onboarding process is really helpful for the success of the board member. A lot of times a board member just comes on, they don't really know anything about the business, they haven't been onboarded. So that's your first entry point. And then having board retreats, I found, has been really good for getting the team to gel. Your board is your team. They're all different people. You need to understand the strengths of each board member. Having a retreat is helpful for that. And that will also help you understand, when you have these dissents, as was raised, which way the dissents might go once you know better who your people are. And at Sirdar, we also do a contribution compass profile, which is based on your natural energy. If you were to run that profiling tool across your board, you would actually understand where people's natural energies are, and that would help you determine where they would go and understand the team. So it is really important to understand who your team are, and bringing in the right person to fit the team, and then working with the team. So these are all ways that you can help the success of a new board member coming in.
Absolutely. It is key to understand how the board functions as a whole, and how we as individuals add to that, and where our part is. Ada, you asked, are there any unique requirements of board members in different sectors, for example, non-profit? Personally, what I find in terms of non-profit, often it is more skills-based or experience-based, that there is a demand and a drive for that. But certainly it is still an understanding of corporate governance, an understanding of an availability and capacity in order to deliver and give inputs and strategy and at strategic level throughout that. Anything there, Farah, that you'd like to add?
I think the challenge I've had when I've been on a lot of nonprofits is that they're not run like a business. And I think that's where sometimes the issue happens. And as a board member, you end up being quite a doer on a lot of them. And so really, the more professional a nonprofit is, the more you can do what you needed to do at the board level and not start going into operational issues. And so other than that, no, I would say that, you know, your skill set as a director should be the same. The only other thing is they're not usually paid roles. So you're doing this because of the cause, you're doing this because you want to add value to, say, education or whatever the cause is. So it's different, but the work you'll be doing is exactly the same, and you'll be investing a lot of your time as well. So those are the only differences I would see. There's not too many nonprofit boards that I know that are paid positions.
Absolutely. I think we have, I see we have a number of chats coming through. I think we've covered many of the questions that have not been dealt with in the actual discussions. So I would like to bring us to an end. Diane mentioned that school boards are a very good way to get experience as they battle to find women, and PDI is willing to serve, absolutely. We need to look at opportunities. We need to, you know, part of that networking is who do we know, you know, that we can actually engage with and fine-tune our skills and abilities. So we do need to call this to an end. And thank you very much, Farah. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
For having me on.
I hope that for everyone that has joined us today, it's been a full house and it's been a real pleasure chatting with you today. We wish you every success on every level, and do take care. Thank you then. Bye-bye.